Welcome to Gen Z Talks. Today we are going to be talking to Stephanie Sue. Stephanie Sue is an incoming freshman at UC Berkeley. Now, we're all impressed that she got into UC Berkeley, but getting into her university of choice was met with a lot of rejections that she had to endure. This interview is focused on how Stephanie managed those rejections, stayed resilient, and managed her mental health through the process.
Stephanie is passionate about business, tech, and bridging the gap for women in STEM. She's currently pursuing an internship with Fiveable, the co-founder of Ad Astra Youth and the lead director of Superposition. Without further ado, let's get started. Thank you, Stephanie, for joining us today on Gen Z Talks. So you are off to the University of California, Berkeley next year, if I'm correct, and your story revolves a lot around getting rejected from a lot of these Ivy League schools. And I know you mentioned about it in one of your LinkedIn posts. So before we get into rejection, I just want to ask you, tell us a bit about yourself. What do you stand for? What are you passionate about?
So I'm Stephanie Sue, an 18-year-old Bay Area incoming college freshman interested in the intersection of tech, business, and social impact. Growing up near the Silicon Valley, I've seen tech and business at the forefront of innovation, and I want to be a part of that. Other than that, I'm interested in empowering women in STEM, and I actually lead an organization called Superposition that aims to do exactly that. On LinkedIn, I like to create content about student life and personal development so I can share my experiences with other people. So overall, I want to help others achieve their goals in any way possible.
Yeah, okay. So you live in the Bay Area, and if you could just walk us through life living in that area as an Asian and talk about the family and community expectations that were put on you.
Absolutely. So for some background, I attend a really competitive public high school where an overwhelming majority of the students are Asian. It's actually a running joke because I think maybe 80 to 90% of our student body is Asian. So you almost never feel like an outsider. However, many of us are children of immigrants, and that hustle mentality is really reflected in our upbringing. For starters, there's a giant emphasis on education. We're constantly told to get ahead of others and be the best, and that expectation can be really overwhelming. Another phenomenon is the pursuit of delayed gratification. The idea is if you work hard and suffer right now, you'll reap the rewards later. But the flaw with that mindset is that you still might not reach your goals in the future, but you'll have sacrificed all your opportunities to enjoy the present. For me, high school seems to have passed by in a blur, and I don't think I properly took the time to enjoy it, but I'll have plenty of opportunities in college.
Yeah, I feel like that competitive environment can be good in one way because it motivates you and helps you bring the best out of you, but it can also get very toxic because, you can end up comparing yourself to others and you just go through this rabbit hole. So since you were in such a very competitive environment in high school, what sort of extracurriculars were you involved in through middle school and high school?
Yeah, I can start with middle school. So middle school, I was entirely involved. I was trying to get my interests together. So the main thing I did was play violin. I took private lessons since fourth grade. I was so scared of my teacher. She was another Asian woman, and that strict mentality really carried through, especially with music. I stopped private lessons at the end of eighth grade, however, and I also did competitive math. The story for this one's kind of fun. Basically, there's this website called Art of Problem Solving, which is like the Mecca or like the Wikipedia of math, and they have a lot of fun games. So one day on Christmas in seventh grade, I got sick because I got stuck at the top of a ski slope for 2 hours. So when I came back to the hotel on Christmas Day, I was extremely sick and I was really bored. So I started doing a lot of math problems. I started doing math a long time ago, but this was the one time where I really fell in love with it. So I remained dedicated to competitive math for the rest of seventh and eighth grade. Then I also did competitive debate. So my parents forced me into this one. So in the first 2 years, I didn't have a lot of fun, but in eighth grade, that's when I started really picking it up and succeeding more in debate. So in high school, my main thing was running student organizations. I mentioned Superposition earlier. It's an international nonprofit that aims to bridge the gender gap in STEM through chapters, events, and mentorship. Currently, we have 88 chapters in 15 countries. My second largest extracurricular was Ad Astra Youth, which is an organization that aims to support student leaders through pro bono consultations and mentorship. So far, I've consulted with over 113 student organizations. Then there's also speech and debate, which I continued on from middle school. Another great thing is, one, you get better at debate as time goes, but secondly, I was able to apply those debate skills in my public speaking engagements, and so far I've given over 30 talks just like this. And as for my other activities, they're pretty standard, so other student organizations, Key Club, volunteering, etc.
Wow. Okay. So moving on into university, how did you decide what program you wanted to pursue? Because I know that decision can be very overwhelming. And if I'm correct, you're pursuing a degree in computer science, right? And then on the side, product management and social entrepreneurship. So how did you come to that decision? And when did you know that you wanted to pursue this degree?
Mhm. So growing up in a family of software engineers, computer science is always seen as the default. My parents were both software engineers, and my two siblings currently work at Amazon and Wish as software engineers. So I would say it kind of runs in the family. And my siblings also got CS degrees. So my parents' mentality was essentially, you're going to do computer science unless you find something you like more and that's lucrative. So I decided to stick with computer science. But of course, there's more reasoning behind that. Ever since third grade, I've been doing competitive math, although it didn't really pick up until middle school. However, in sixth grade, that's when programming really came into the picture. My dad found this programming class on WeChat and signed me up without telling me, which is the quintessential Asian student experience. And that's how I learned how to code for the first time. And at the end of that class, I made this game called Flappy Ball, which is like Flappy Bird, but with a ball and much, much worse. Even though the game looked terrible, I still had a lot of fun doing it. Because one thing I found in programming that I didn't find in math was the capacity to build. When I'm solving problems on a paper, that's where the answer stays. But when I code something, I can make it come to life, like through a website. So that's one thing I really like about computer science, is that a tool can be used to make solutions. And the other aspect I like about it is versatility. No matter what your other interests are, whether it's art or business, you can find an intersection of computer science in that. And I really appreciate that because I have a lot of varied interests and I don't want to have to give up any one of those. With a CS degree, I wouldn't have to.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure in superposition, you're really passionate about bridging the gap for STEM and women, right? So do you find that a lot of girls are going into STEM currently? And if not, why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of girls going to STEM, especially in the Bay Area. We're a very STEM-oriented place, living right near SF and Silicon Valley. However, there's still a shortage because women comprise only 28% of the STEM workforce, so there's a couple of reasons for this. First is stereotypes about traditionally masculine and feminine activities. When you're in elementary school and you see all those picture books, there's usually a certain gender associated with every activity, like ballet is for girls, football is for guys, science is for guys, and the more feminine activities are often left for girls. And from an early age, we're conditioned to think that we don't belong in science because we don't see anybody like that. And secondly, there's also a lack of role models. Because there's so few women in STEM in comparison to men, it's very hard for women to find someone to look up to, and thus they feel like they don't belong. And last but not least is lack of supportive environments. In most of my STEM classes outside of school, I've been one of the few girls there. In fact, one of my math teachers, when I walked into class, said, "Look, we have our first girl," as if that was really revolutionary. He was right, but it was still very strange to point out. And that's because there's not enough environments specifically designed for girls, so they're discouraged from coming in the first place. And all of these factors contribute to girls losing interest early on, which is why the drop-off rate for girls in STEM starts in elementary school.
Wow, yeah. So at Superposition, how are you working to overcome this barrier and help more girls get into STEM?
So Superposition started as the Bay Area's largest all-women and non-binary hackathon in 2016. The majority of hackathons are co-ed, but their gender ratio is abysmal. Sometimes you'll see only like 10 to 15% of attendees being women. So when our founder, Arita Wong, attended Girls Who Code, which is a summer coding program for girls, she realized that there need to be more programs for women in STEM. So she founded Superposition, and we've been hosting that hackathon ever since. But when I took over as lead director, I wanted to do more because we had the resources, we had the woman power and willpower to do so. So we expanded. The first way was through chapters. I realized that we couldn't bring everyone to a hackathon in San Francisco, but we could bring our experience to them. So now we have 88 chapters around the world. Secondly is through mentorship. Solving that second problem I talked about, a lack of mentors, we pair girls in STEM with mentors in college and professional working ages so that they can see someone who already walked their path. And the last way is through events. So we want to provide as many learning opportunities as possible for women, such as the hackathons. But outside of that, we hosted conferences, workshops, panels, and more.
Wow, that's awesome. So moving on to a slightly different topic, LinkedIn. You are a pretty well-known LinkedIn content creator. And as a high school content creator on LinkedIn, how are you able to gain the credibility and establish such a diverse network of a lot of professionals and adults?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, the key to successful content creation is authenticity. I might have fewer life experiences than many of my connections, but that doesn't negate the importance of the lessons I've learned. I've actually made a post about this recently where I was invited on a panel and I was the only high school student. Everyone else was between 5 and 20 years older than me. And I realized that even though I was young, I still had great experiences and I still had lessons to be told. So as long as I try to be my unique self, then all the people who want to follow me are the ones who enjoy hearing my story. I write about topics that I can speak confidently about and that really matter to me, such as student leadership and personal growth. As such, much of my audience is students, but there are universal experiences like embracing one's culture or overcoming imposter syndrome that everyone can relate to. So no matter what age you are, there's always some element of my story that's relatable.
Mm-hmm. I think when you're really authentic is when you can really relate to people and people can connect to your stories. So that's it for my questions, and I'll pass it on to Anu.
So Stephanie, let's hook on to that whole LinkedIn article because that's how we got connected, and I'm sure a lot of people get connected to you because of that as well, and many other things that you do. Now, I understand that you applied to multiple Ivy League schools and got rejected. Can you share that experience? Because I think that experience is vital for people to understand.
Definitely. So my first mention of Ivy Leagues was when I was, I think, around 5 years old. And in kindergarten or first grade for the back to school night, we had this assignment where there's this like t-shirt on a paper, and then you fill out that t-shirt with what your interests are, what you hope to be in the future. I think most of my classmates said something along the lines of, I want to be an astronaut or a mermaid or like a princess, something like that. I wrote that I wanted to be a CEO and Harvard graduate at age 5 before I really knew what any of that meant. And that's because my parents told me those were good things to do. So I assumed that I should do them. And throughout elementary school and middle school, I had this really naive mindset about colleges. My mom said, would you actually go to Harvard? I was like, no, but let me get in first just to prove that I can. And all of that confidence really faded away in high school. I will say that. I was brought back down to earth once I saw how competitive my fellow students were. And throughout high school, I felt a lot of pressure to be the best, eventually getting to top college. Even though it's not something people enjoy thinking about, it's always in the back of our mind. It's always a consideration whenever we're choosing classes or picking extracurriculars. I knew from early on that I was going to apply to the Ivy League, but I didn't really make an intentional journey in order to apply to that. I strongly believe that you should not do anything for college, and I wanted to stay true to myself. But I will say that did not advantage me at the end because, of course, those people who specifically want to get into Ivy Leagues and plan their high school to do that are better set up for it. And I can't deny that. So being true to myself wasn't necessarily the best strategy for getting to college, but I'm still happy with my decision. So eventually it came down to first semester senior year. It seemed to fly by so fast. And it was easily the worst time of my life because I was taking the heaviest course load I've ever seen in my life. And not only that, the courses were harder than I was used to. My time management was going out the window. My sleep schedule just did not exist. And applying to all those colleges was incredibly stressful. There were so many essays. I kept trying to not only be myself, but be someone that I think the colleges want to see, think about all these qualities like intellectual vitality, and it really stressed me out. My mental health went out the window at that time, and I would literally cry at the drop of a hat. During winter break, I pulled so many all-nighters, but I got all those essays done and eventually applied to those 5 schools. I was waiting and waiting and waiting, and even though I knew my chances were slim, I still had that hope. But then came Ivy Day, when all the Ivy League schools release their decisions at once, which is a little brutal in my opinion. You know, you can, like, one day at 4 p.m. Pacific, you can hear up to 8 decisions if you apply to all 8 schools. And for me, I got waitlisted at Cornell and rejected at the 5 other Ivies I applied to, which did sting a little bit, but it wasn't my top choice Stanford, although I got rejected from that the next day. So Ivy Day didn't hurt too much, but it was more of a shock.
So, I mean, wow, it's overwhelming to hear just this whole story. And I mean, it's wonderful that, and a lot of high school students do want to stay authentic and want to enjoy their high school journey rather than focus on just that one university, I guess, application to that one university. But your suggestion right now is, if you do want to get into that Ivy League school, you should know what they're looking for and kind of cater your grade 9, 10, 11 to that particular college. How did you manage yourself when you got those rejections?
Yeah, so the first step was trying to allow myself to feel. I'm someone who takes a while to actually react to things. So I saw the rejection letter and I told myself I was fine. I'm totally fine. This doesn't hurt me, until several hours later when I started seeing all my peers getting into these same schools that I wish I could get into. So I felt a little sad at that point, but again, it wasn't my top choice. And I'm not a huge fan of the East Coast anyway. But the next day, I got my Stanford decision back, and that's been my #1 choice for the past couple of years. I wouldn't call it a dream school because I don't think I should attach a dream to any specific institution when a lot of them can offer me the same things. But eventually, over that week, I saw a lot of people that I really want to meet, cool people from all across the country, getting into Stanford, and I just couldn't. So at that moment, I just started crying. I finally allowed myself to feel because I'd been bottling up those feelings for several days. And I was tired of it. By pretending like I wasn't okay, I was denying my emotions, and that was going to help me get over it. But then the second thing I did was reflect. I'm an extremely introspective person. I have shower thoughts on the daily, like basically at all times. I have a private Snapchat story where I post all these, which is kind of why I also got into LinkedIn content. I just like thinking a lot. So I did some reflection. I first asked, why does this result matter to me? And I realized that most colleges will give you a good experience. And even then, the things I liked about Stanford, I could mostly find in Berkeley because right in the same location, strong entrepreneurial culture, great CS program. But I'd somehow convinced myself that these private institutions were much better than the ones I'd already gotten into. And I think I was really deluding myself in that. But that's also because it's much easier to want what you can't have than appreciate what you do have. The second was how much of this decision was actually in my control. I told myself all the crazy factors this year, like test optional, enrollments or number of applications increasing by like 60% at some schools. It was just a terrible year for college admissions. And the third is, will I care about this several months from now? Well, I haven't gotten to the several months point yet. It's been like 2 months, month and a half. But I will say I'm getting over it much better. I'm really excited to go to Berkeley. I've come up with a list of so many restaurants I want to try. And I'm just trying to focus on falling in love with the school I am going to because I know that it is a great place. And the last thing I would recommend people to do is make a game plan. Sure, it's okay to, I guess, wallow in your pain a little bit, feel down, but you all have to get back up because the only time you've truly failed is when you refuse to try again. So a couple of questions for your game plan. 1, how can I improve myself? What opportunities can I come from rejection? And who can help me take that next step? For me, one of the opportunities I found was a great way to connect with other people. So that's one of the motivating factors for me posting about my rejections on LinkedIn. Because after that, so many people reached out to me saying that my story resonated with them. And especially in the comments, people were talking about their stories as well. And I realized this is a universal experience that people don't talk about enough. So even though I did get rejected from my top choice colleges, I found a new opportunity, which is making all these great connections, and I know they can help me in the future.
Wow. I mean, those are really great examples and solutions that you provided. So, fascinating thing about sharing your content, sharing your thoughts to other people is that there'll always be those negative folks who will say something negative about you, right? I mean, you're there sharing your insights, really being authentic on LinkedIn. And now I heard that someone actually posted your viral post on Reddit, and there was a lot of anonymous negative comments around it. How do you manage that kind of negativity? And if you can share some of the negative comments around it as well.
So there's this really popular subreddit called Applying to College, which is a safe haven for many students during college application season. I've actually been on it for a couple months, though I didn't create an account. I was just lurking and seeing all these posts. It's really entertaining. And the thing that really shocked me is that this community tends to be very supportive. People tend to call it toxic and they tell you not to go on it, but all the posts I've seen are very supportive. The moment someone says they have a problem, usually people are there in the comments giving advice. And I really like that kind of environment. So I was really shocked to see that my post had been put on there and people were basically doing the equivalent of like a virtual eye roll at me, like collectively. And that post got almost 1,000 upvotes, which is around 1,000 likes, and then over 220 comments, most of them being really nasty. So the most creative comment by far goes to the person who said, I have the self-awareness of a half-eaten Pop-Tart drenched in mayonnaise. I don't know what that means. So it didn't hurt. I was just like, where did you get this from? Like, I certainly hope someone didn't actually eat that before because that's disgusting. But then there's this guy who was from my school. I'm very sure I know who he is, even though the account is supposedly anonymous. But he said, unfortunately, I go to the same school as this person, and it doesn't surprise me that she has BS'd and snaked her way through all of her activities. She hasn't done anything authentic, and she claims to be a genius, but she's really not. She's above average at best, but she's certainly not a genius, not a savant, and this post has cemented her as an idiot in my book. For reference, in my commitment post about talking to Berkeley, I said that I was branded as a genius early on. I probably could have articulated my point better, but what I was saying is the number one thing I was known for throughout all of elementary, middle school, and high school, but less so in high school, was being smart. That was my thing, and everyone put really high pressure on me to succeed. For example, people would take scoring higher than me on a test as this grand accomplishment, and that people constantly ask what I scored, constantly ask me about my grades. And that's kind of where my identity came from. That's where my brand came from in high school. So this person was taking that one element and just blowing it up, trying to call me an idiot. And people in the comments even agreed that, like, hey, I don't think this post was a good idea, but how could you deny that anything that she didn't require intelligence or courage? So that was one positive thing that came out of it, is that people were really going for the ad hominem attacks. They were trying to attack my character, but at the end of the day, nobody was able to attack the authenticity of the work I've done during high school. As for dealing with that, fortunately, getting rejected from my top 5 colleges hurt way more than that. I actually cared about these colleges' opinions for a while, but do I care about the opinions of anonymous Redditors who can't say anything to my face? Not exactly. And I also went on a call with one of my favorite LinkedIn content creators. His name is Jonathan Javier. He has over 100,000 followers on LinkedIn. I reached out to him. I asked him if he had any advice for overcoming hate, and he offered to FaceTime me on the spot. And I was like, you probably have better things to do right now. And he said, I'm making TikToks. Go ahead. So he called me and gave me a lot of great advice. One thing that really stood out to me was people who are above you don't have the time of day to care about bringing you down. It's only the people below you who want to be you that want to bring you down to their level. And the second thing is ignore the haters. I was really tempted to make a response. I made a Reddit account. I was going to type something on there, or I was going to address it in a LinkedIn post. But then I realized, well, at least Jonathan told me that these people have a closed mindset about you. If they're not willing to talk to you, to ask you if anything you did was authentic, didn't ask you to clarify their meaning, that's because they're approaching you with a closed mindset. They want to find some reason to hate you. So even if you explain yourself, even if you try to clarify what you actually meant, they're not going to change their opinion. And those were 2 really critical pieces of advice for dealing with all this hate. But fortunately, again, it didn't hurt all that much. I don't know who these people are. They're not going to affect me in the future. They can hate on me all they want, but they still can't deny the success I've had in high school, nor the success of my LinkedIn posts.
Wow. Wow. And kudos to Jonathan for, being available to you and to provide you with the advice that you need at that time, because that's really needed, especially when you have negativity coming your way and you're dealing with all these rejections and trying to be resilient and being authentic. Having someone like Jonathan on your side is phenomenal. So let's go back to grade 9 now. And if there are any students in grade 9 and they want to get into these universities, now looking back at what you have done, one of the things that you shared is find out what that university is looking for and then carve your high school experience through that. Maybe you might have other advice for grade 9ers who are entering into high school and want to get into these Ivy League schools.
Yeah, so firstly, I do want to send the message that you should not prepare your life for high school. In fact, my ex-best friend did do that. She didn't necessarily get the results she wants. She was going to a fantastic school, but it shows that you can plan everything right, do everything people tell you to, and it might not work out. So that's the first thing. Don't pine your entire high school career on this one goal, because if you don't get it, it'll be massively disappointing. For me, it did hurt, but I also didn't plan my life for college, so it hurt a little bit less. I enjoyed everything that did. And the second thing is find things that you really enjoy doing regardless of college applications. With superposition, that's the number one thing that gave me purpose throughout college application season. It's the one thing that kept me going because I knew that regardless of what these colleges thought of me, regardless of what these colleges thought of my work with superposition, I knew I was creating a positive impact for women in STEM, and that was reward enough. So think about a future in which you get rejected from all the places you want to. Was your high school experience still worth it? For me, absolutely. But now, as for the advice aspects, you don't necessarily know what colleges want, and people try to predict it, and they do try to carve themselves towards that, but still might not work out. So I think the best thing is being authentic, and you can target this. For me, I thought that being myself and planning for college were polar opposites. They were mutually exclusive. I couldn't do them at the same time. But I would say that applying for college, if you want to get into these top choice schools, you can have a mindset, but no clear set path about how to do it. So the mindset I would adopt is find something you really enjoy doing early on and stick to it. So this comes in two facets. The first one would be intellectual vitality. This is a phrase that's especially valued by Stanford. Intellectual vitality is basically your willingness to learn, to be proactive in your learning, learn independently. So this usually comes in the form of some sort of academic research, something outside the classroom. So my advice for that would be to discover an academic passion and pursue it in depth. Enter competitions, join clubs related to it, teach other students about it. For this, I actually didn't have anything intellectual vitality related. I did a couple of math competitions, but none of the big ones, not besides AMC, which is the most popular one. So you couldn't really see where my academic interests lie. Superposition is only tangentially related to that because it's more about empowering the people rather than learning the subject. Then the second part is finding individuality. So find a hobby that you do just for fun and see how you can connect it to your academic passion. This can give you a secondary edge. If people want to find a highly qualified CS major, there are tens of thousands all across the country. If you want to find a highly qualified bio major, there's also many of them just like that. How are you to differentiate? You're going to see what other aspects round them out and make them a full person. So one essay that I've seen online is someone who combined their love of cooking and chemistry, or physics and ballet, or these two really interesting combinations that don't sound like they should go together in the beginning, but they work out. For me, I discovered this a little bit too late. So mine was a little bit more standard. Mine was more like tech and business or tech and humanities. I do a lot of debate, and within debate, we do debate about the ethics of tech sometimes. For example, we've debated about the NSA, offensive cyber operations, and more. So that was kind of the angle that I was taking, like applying a humanities approach to technology. Didn't necessarily work out for most of my schools, but that is totally okay. At least I have this advice that I can give later. And of course, don't underestimate common advice. I kept trying to tell myself, like, please stop telling me to start my essays early because I didn't do that. And I hated hearing that advice over and over again. But the reason why it's so common is that because it works. So keep up your grades, maintain strong relationships with your teachers, start early, etc. All this common advice people are telling you, follow it now so that you don't regret it later, as I do.
So, I mean, there are a lot of organizations that help high school kids. And how is it in the Bay Area? Do high school kids actually join these organizations so that they have a step up to getting into these universities?
Yeah, absolutely. I find that a lot of students use college counselors. I had one as well. And even though I got my college counselor pretty late, as in the beginning of September, right before college app season, I still think it really helped me have a bit of more certainty and confidence. Because previously, I had no idea what colleges were looking for. I had no ideas if my essays were how they're supposed to sound. But having that college counselor along the way who's actually read essays before and tell me, like, this is a good essay, that gave me a lot more confidence. I will say that I opted for a very expensive option, and I would not recommend that to most people unless, one, they can afford it comfortably, and secondly, they can start with that company earlier. Overall, I would say don't pay more than a couple of $1,000s for college counseling. One of my close friends paid like well over 10,000 for it and still got similar results to me. So it's not about the college counselor, and there's no way for you to pay to guarantee that you're going to get into these top schools, but it's all about, one, making yourself confident, but secondly, setting yourself up so that you have the best tools to craft an application.
And are you okay to share any organizations' names? I mean, not necessarily yours, but what other organizations are out there that does this?
Yeah, so you can easily find any of them online. They all usually have the word Ivy or admissions in there somewhere. Like there's one that I know of called Ivy Wise, and then Ivy League Admissions, or Solomon Admissions, or Ivy Max, which is one of the ones that's really common in my area. They have a bunch of branches all across California. So they're really easy to look at, and it is overwhelming trying to choose one. My parents and I went through several consultation calls with a bunch of companies, and of course, as with consultations, they don't give you that much information. Like the person on the line doesn't know much about college admissions, they're just a rep for the company. So it's really hard to figure out what's the right fit for you. But I think going on those calls is really valuable. For example, I was calling with one company, and this was completely run by Chinese people, so they had a very like straightforward, direct attitude to things. This person was looking at my LinkedIn. She's like, "You don't have research? You're not taking AP Bio?" And then on my ACT, which is a standardized test, I got a 36, which is a full score. But then she said, "But you only got an 8 out of 12 on the essay. People who want to get into Stanford get 11." So right off the bat, this person was telling me about everything that was wrong with me, especially stuff that I couldn't change in the moment. So I automatically knew, like, I cannot stand working with this person. No, thank you. So it's all about knowing what your priorities are and what you're looking for in a college counselor. My college counselor was really similar to my personality. He's like almost a little bit too blunt, but when he praises you, he goes all in. He's really supportive. But when you're doing something stupid, he will tell you and he'll say, try again. But that's what I really appreciate, just finding someone who fit me well.
Okay, so you do recommend, I mean, in a sense, it would be beneficial to go through a college counselor, but there are no guarantees. That's what, just
Yeah.
go with the mindset that there are no guarantees, but just put in the work. Would you suggest people to start at grade 9 or 10 or 11? Which grade would you suggest them to reach out to these college counselors and organizations?
Yeah, so I think it really depends. So as for the student, if you are really gunning for one of those top choices and you will do anything it takes, I think the earlier you start, the better, because the college counselor can help you choose activities that will set you up for success. And with that, some college counselors might recommend activities you don't care about. In that respect, you should still be authentic. Don't take on anything that you're not going to enjoy. You're going to have a terrible time writing an essay or answering questions about it. But I do think it's really helpful. If you're still on the fence and you don't know if you really care about tailoring your application perfectly for college, or you just want to do what you like I did, then either don't get a college counselor or you can get one starting the beginning of junior year. One of my friends, he got one right after 10th grade, and this person helped them choose classes, and then a separate person helped out with editing. Even though he had his college counselor so early, they didn't do a fantastic job. So again, his results were kind of similar to mine. So it really depends on the company and how much you think you're able to get out of that.
Oh, that on its own should be an interview.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's so much to say about college counselors. Fortunately, there's a lot of resources for finding out about which college counselor is good for you. So on r/apply to college, which is that subreddit I was talking about earlier, there's this one, I think, moderator or a college counselor. His name is u/scholar grade. He created this really comprehensive guide to all the things you need to look for in a college counselor. Don't choose some kid that just got into college. Like they don't know anything about how they got in. They don't know anything about college admissions. So you have to be really careful when people are marketing their services like that.
Right. Sorry, u/scholar grade, is that an Instagram?
That's a Reddit handle. So if you look him up, then you'll find all of his posts.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know as well. So Stephanie, let's move on to Ad Astra, which is an organization that you created. So tell us a little bit about it.
Absolutely. So Ad Astra is an organization that consults and mentors student organizations in anything from operations to finances to growth to marketing, etc. Basically anything you can imagine with a student organization, I can help you out with. So Ad Astra is just me and that other friend I told you about before. He's my best friend, and we just do this. We keep it pretty low key because we didn't want to scale it too much, since something like this is super hard to scale. It's like you have one counselor and one consultant, and every consultant has to do all this time. There's no way to make it more efficient. You just have to do it. So that's why I kept it kind of low key. But as for the origin story, in I think March or April, Superposition wanted to start its chapters, but we had no idea how to do it. At that point, we were a team of 4 people because most of our other team members had left. However, I still wanted to find out a way for us to launch a successful chapter program, even with this few people. So I got on calls with 2 other student leaders, the founders of WeTech and Girls Got STEAM, which are 2 organizations that also promoted women in STEM. And I asked them how they set up their chapter program or something similar to a chapter. And because of them, we had a really great framework for setting up our chapter program. And I wanted to give back. So that was one of my first LinkedIn posts. Well, first, like formal content creation kind of posts, where I talked about all how these 2 girls helped me out and I want to pay it forward. So I was open to any coffee chats with students who want to improve their organizations, want to get feedback on anything. I was there to help you. And there's an overwhelming demand for this. I think I had over 20 coffee chats within the next few weeks because people really want to talk to me. And I realized that there's a demand for these kinds of services, but no supply for it. There's lots of students who want to create social impact, but they don't know where to start. So that's where the idea of Ad Astra came from. Ad Astra in Latin means to the stars. And I've kind of been obsessed with stars, like galaxies and all that astronomy stuff since 6th grade, kind of as like a side interest because the science is way too complicated for me to get into. But I still love that theme because it's motivating people to go above and beyond their boundaries to try to accomplish something great. So that's where the name came from. And ever since then, we've had consultations over 113 organizations in 7 countries. We've also launched a 1-month mentorship program where we gave a little bit more long-term support. And our mentees went on to host 3 virtual conferences with 2,000 attendees in 69 countries.
Wow. So can you tell us about the organizations, the type of organizations that you support, and how did you help them, and what are the results that they got?
Yeah, so one of the most prominent organizations was called Simply Neuroscience. They were really big to begin with. I think they're a 200-person organization. So I was really surprised when they signed up for this program, and I was like, what do they have to gain from me? Like, their organization's probably bigger, much bigger, and more organized than Superposition, but they signed up anyway. And their president at the time had such fantastic questions. I think the biggest thing he was asking me about was sponsorship. Like, how do you even get money? And I first told him about all the different ways you can get sponsorship, but a few more strategies, such as find out what you have to offer besides promotion and like visibility, because everyone can provide this. But the unique thing you have is a student audience. What kind of companies want to work with students? Test prep companies, ed tech companies, college consulting companies. If you can target these companies that want to work with your audience, you're gonna have a much higher success rate. Another thing they asked about was marketing, and I talked about the use of personal branding. On LinkedIn, one way I really bolstered Superposition's presence is that I post about my personal. People find it a lot easier to connect with you on a personal level than if it's a company LinkedIn page. So I use myself as a medium for telling Superposition's story, and that drastically increased our following, and that increased the number of people who were interested in us. So that was one strategy that I suggested. And then some more standard marketing things like, think about why people wouldn't want to come, spam Instagram stories, find ambassadors, and all of that. So that was one of the biggest organizations we work with. Another big one who's hosted a virtual conference called Beam. They were really new at the time. It's a community dedicated to helping seniors apply to college. I'm still in it right now. And what they wanted help for was also sponsorship and marketing. So kind of really similar niches. They were both doing event planning, and those were the things that students tend to struggle with most.
Wow. Okay. So, and are you going to manage this while you go into university as well? The 2-person organization?
So I've been talking to my co-executive director about that, and on one hand, we do want to help people wherever possible, but at the same time, it's not the most sustainable thing to like always allow our schedule to be open these certain times a day because we don't know what our schedule is going to look like in college. So right now, that's still up in the air. I think the most likely options are 1, do it, but reduce the amount of time slots we make available. Maybe do like at most 5 a month, or we can try to do team applications to find someone to pass this down to. The really difficult thing about this is when you're doing consulting, you can't necessarily train someone. Like if they have the experience, you can train them to talk to people, but you can't make up for any experience that they don't have. So that's why team applications would be a very difficult process, but that is one of the 2 routes we're going down.
Sorry, when you're saying team applications, what does that mean?
We can open up applications to recruit other people to take over the organization for us while we serve as executive directors or advisors to the executive directors.
Okay. And do you manage these conferences, or do you advise on how other organizations can handle conferences? and all that stuff.
Yeah, so we give advice. We don't directly work on the conference, but we do oversee some of the organizations that work on them. So every single week, they'll just give us a quick update and bring up any concerns they have so we can answer the questions. Thank you so much for having me on here. It was a great time talking about all of my interests, college admissions, and Ad Astra and superposition. These are all topics I'm incredibly passionate about, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share them with more students, especially in Gen Z. So if you want to reach out to me, then feel free to email me at stephsue@berkeley.edu, connect with me on LinkedIn as Stephanie Sue, or check out my personal website, stephsue.me. I'm totally open to having coffee chats and helping students out with whatever I can, because I want to make sure everyone else can achieve their goals, even if I struggled along the way to achieve mine. So thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
And thank you so much, Stephanie, again, for sharing your path authentically with us. I'm sure it's going to impact many students when we share this interview with our community.